Apologies if that interrupted conversations in mid-flow. In classic Uncon fashion, Dave said he was going to do the introduction. I messaged him to say, "Are you going to start?" I dived on the stage and said, "Gabby, I'm waiting for you." So yeah, blame me. That's fine. Blame me. It's all my fault. Yes, thank you, Gabby. Yes, you will blame me. So we're now into the last bit. This is the panel debate. We've got a great panel of people who got a lot of time for both technology and housing. So I think we've got a really good mix. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Gabby. So over to you, Gabby. And you're on mute, by the way.
There we go, off mute. Thanks everyone for sticking around on day 2, last session. It feels a bit like the graveyard panel, but I can guarantee you that it will not be that, because we've got 4 amazing panelists, each with their own expertise, opinions, and controversial opinions about everything to do with housing, but especially data quality, which is what this session is going to be about. So I'd like to invite all the 4 speakers to the stage. We've got Paul Taylor from Bromford, we've got Lara Oyedele, who is a private landlord and does Black on Board and other consultancy work here in Bradford, and the consultancy work and things nationally. We've got Tripti Arya, who works for Trafters / Adam. She will tell us more about that. And of course, we've got Matthew Jollens, who works at Alliance. And I would just like you all to ask you to introduce yourselves, tell us a bit about yourselves, what you do, why you're here, why you agreed to be on this panel maybe, and let's get the conversation going. And before, so we're going to use the chat again for questions. So we've got the Q&A option for questions, and obviously comment away in the chat, and we'll try to get some questions and comments from there as well. So I'll start with the person on my right-hand side, which is Lara.
Thank you, Gabby. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lara Oyedele. I'm a Tottenham girl who now lives in Bradford, West Yorkshire. I'm a private buy-to-let landlord, one of the bad guys. But also, I've spent 25 years working for different housing associations, homelessness charities, and managers of public sector housing. So my career history is steeped in social housing. I've done just about every aspect of housing management that is known, and leasehold management, and well, you name it, I've done it. I currently freelance, like I said, I'm a buy-to-let landlord. I'm trying to set up what I'm calling an affordable housing company that is not regulated by the regulator for social housing. So I want to take all the best bits of social housing and all the nimbleness and freedom that you have in the buy-to-let sector, combine the best qualities of both, and create my new entity, which is yet to have a name, because I'm not sure if it's a company or a co-op or a KIC, but it's going to be something. Yes, so that's where I'm at the moment. And I also do online training to encourage more Black and ethnic minority people to become board members. And I'm here today as your walking down the street skeptic to think, data, what data? You guys don't know what you're talking about. That's my role.
Thank you, Laura. Next up to that right for me is Matt.
Hi, so my name is Matt Jollens. I am the Performance and Analytics Manager at Alliance Homes. We're a small housing association in Portishead. It's about 6,500 properties. As they say, whenever they interview someone from Sage on Radio 4, I'm speaking in independent capacity. Because while I have been working on and off in social housing since probably 2012, 2013. I still very much consider myself to not be a social housing professional. I don't want to be lumped in with you guys. But basically my interest in this is that we do data as a general observation, social housing, I think data is done extraordinarily badly, and there are better ways of doing things. And as Gabby emailed me, I think, can you come and say something controversial about data? So here I am.
Welcome, Matt. Tripti?
Hi, Gabby. So I think, as you mentioned, I run a company called Craftus. We have evolved that company from being a development firm, a construction company based out of Bombay, then out of Singapore, and have pivoted to being an AI R&D shop for real estate for the past 3 years based out of London. In addition to having developed multiple properties around the globe, I do manage and own my own portfolio as well. But primarily, my day job is focused on building Adam, which uses NLP and machine learning in order to automate property operations. And we currently have about 20,000 apartments in the US, which use the technology since the past 1 year in order to do exactly that.
Sounds exciting. I think you will be talking a bit more about that, and I'm sure there will be questions about that, I hope.
Sure.
And otherwise I'll ask them. Paul.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Paul Taylor. I'm innovation coach with Bromford. I set up the Bromford's approach to innovation about 6 years ago now with kind of Bromford Lab. I have a love-hate relationship with data in the sense that data is vital to innovation. The connection is just undeniable. But frequently it's about getting the right data, and it's about having kind of protocols around that data. I certainly agree with, some comments previously about the state of data within the sector has been largely poor, if not abysmal. And that's requires a kind of very different mindset. I think if we're going to push forward and make use of some of the technologies and the opportunities that are available to us at the moment to deliver very different value to customers' lives, we're going to have to get our act in order about kind of data and data protocols. And I probably started off on my kind of innovation journey as a bit of a data skeptic. But I would say actually, I've matured, I would say gracefully and appropriately in terms of now recognizing that you can't really advance innovation without a really structured approach to data. And that's probably my sort of the bit I'll probably argue for today.
Thank you very much. I see we have no questions from the floor yet. So let's start with, I think, like a very, very easy question, I hope. And you've all kind of mentioned that you're kind of in the middle of that data skeptic, data loving, so that love-hate relationship. And I've also commented on how bad data quality actually kind of is in social housing at the moment. For all on the panel, what if you could name one reason why that quality is so poor still in 2020, what would be that main reason? Anyone to go first? Open question.
No, I don't mind going first. Okay. Very brief anecdote by way of explaining my position on this. So a few years ago, we started everyone's got a transformation program in the housing sector, so it's not new that we've got one. But I started facilitating what our approach to transformation would be, and what that meant doing was interviewing kind of the lead on 32 different service areas. That's not 32 teams, but 32 service areas that operate across our kind of housing association. And what I was asking them all is, what do you want to change about this what does this transformation need to bring about? Every single one of them, and this is no lie, named better quality data as being one of the things that they needed out of the transformation. But apart from 3 areas, every single one blamed everybody else for the quality of the data within the organisation. It was not their problem. And fundamentally, Gabby, that would be my sort of quick answer. Then a lot of organisations, our organisations, we're not clear about the question of who owns the data, who sets the rules around it, and what are the rules of operation for people, And, I'll put my hand up here and say, we've employed there's nothing wrong with temporary staff, by the way. I'm not making that suggestion, but we've employed temporary people to data input tenant data, essentially, in the past across our organisation with very, very little skills or training. We've taken the most important thing in our organisation ultimately and kind of farmed it out with very little kind of rules and protocols around it. So I think the whole thing about, if you're going to want to make data-driven decisions, you want to have data-driven innovation, you've got to have some protocols and expertise behind it, and I'm not sure we've approached that with sufficient maturity.
I think that sits in well with the first question that was asked just now by Dave. If we played the blame game for a second, is data or people? Is it data or people that is the real problem? And it seems a bit like everyone thinks that data is someone else's problem, and we've heard we've heard it before across these 2 days, the mention of data people, and we've got data people for that, and some people just aren't data people. And reviewing over those 2 days, kind of the title of this session, isn't it actually information quality that we're talking about rather than data quality, which kind of ties in with Aidan's question, who asks, what do you mean by poor data quality? A genuine question. And I think I've made it kind of leading in this way, but by saying, isn't it about information quality? But is it, or is it not? Is it a combination?
For my personal opinion, the issue really comes down to the fact that, right, there's a couple of things. No one owns data. No one will say, this is my thing that I am responsible for collecting. And this is one of the things that I'm doing and trying to do in the organization, is actually build a level of ownership. So actually saying, you as the person that manages tenancies own tenancy data. It is your responsibility to ensure that that data is maintained. It is your responsibility to ensure that the processes are in place, so that if something goes awry, you can identify it. That if things are incomplete, it is your problem. But it's really difficult to sort of like forget people. Our old head of contact center basically refused to acknowledge that they might have anything to do with collecting customer contact details, despite the fact that they're the primary source of contact for, we get 6,000 calls a month, which is too many for a housing association of 6,000 houses, but that's another question entirely. And to go to Aidan's point about what is poor quality data, I'm trying to define that. And so I'm trying to say, is it accurate? So does it reflect reality? And also, is it precise? So does it move temporally in a way that you'd expect? So, for example, our head of assets sent me a figure saying that we had 6,320 houses this month, and last month it was 6,454. I was like, we've not sold 124 houses. You're wrong. This is demonstrably not true. One of those data points is incorrect. And who
gets to be right?
Me.
Gabby, can I interject into this part of the conversation? Now,
that's what you're here for.
There's slightly different definitions of data, and I don't want to go into that just now. But as someone who runs 2 tiny businesses, I'm trying to streamline everything I do. I'm trying to maximize the impact of it rather than do the same thing over and over again. And one of the things I'm aware of, I think one of the point I'm trying to say is that one of the key problems with data is getting accurate data and getting it accurate the first time. Because once there's an error in that data, then it's replicated and copied. It's always very difficult to bring that data back once it's out there and it's replicated and copied. And if it's the kind of data that then gets promoted, that goes into your marketing, and then you're stuck with this fact or figure that was an error, and it was a very innocent error to start with. So there's something that I'm thinking of in terms of my processes, which is to get the owners of the information to input it themselves in its final location. Does that make sense? So rather than them fill out a form, give it to me, then I get a PA to type it into the computer, and she transposes a couple of digits or writes Lara instead of Laura, you know, all those things, and then that goes on and on. Yeah, so I think there's a point about having it correct at the start of its entity, and then try to reduce the amount of replication and copying, and get the original input to go to where it needs to be at source, if possible. That's all I'll add for now.
Do you want to come in there, Tripti, or?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, yes.
Well, I think my biggest problem is actually some of the commentary we have made, which is talking about data as if we understand it. So firstly, what data? What is it that we need? Secondly, what are we trying to solve? Thirdly, for all of this, you know, transformation, what are you trying to transform? The problem is the surveys that we do are within our own organizations. And nobody actually cares about the user. And the user is your tenant or the person who actually lives in that house. Now, whether you're a private landlord or a public landlord, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you still have to provide services to the end user. And the end user is telling you every day what they want. You don't need a survey for that. You get 6,000 calls in a month from 6,000 units. That is data that is being given to you on a daily basis, which nobody has any desire to actually look at, because it would require them to go through a very manual process. And this is why when we talk about data as data analytics or even software is extremely problematic, because we're actually talking about something that is 10 years old. And this is my biggest problem with real estate, which is we're playing catch up in a world where we're having conversations today which were had 10 years ago in different industries. And in fact, none of this is relevant in the world of technology that we actually live in. When your tenant calls you in a call center, it can pipe through data pipelines, which tells you what category it goes into. You can find out the intent of what it is that they want to do. And if you do put the right kind of solution behind it, it can go down to the level of exactly what question that they're asking. So, for example, the work that we've done in the last 1 year in the US, we onboarded a client 3 months ago. In 3 weeks, we were able to say that 27% of everything they get is maintenance requests. Everything else was a long tail of data, which actually included 65 topics that people were talking about, moving from gate access to how do I get my package lockers to open, to my pet has died and I actually need a refund on my pet in rent which I've been paying, which by the way, by policy, they can't request. So there's that first stage, which is just business intelligence. And we keep assuming that that intelligence will come from people. And I'm really sorry to burst this bubble, that intelligence is not people. That intelligence requires you to actually go ahead, adopt technology, which is cutting edge. So you can keep buying as much software as you want because you want it to integrate into something. You're about to spend a lot of cash for nothing. Have 5 other people as consultants to try to get it onboarded. Then you'll have another group of people. So you're actually, every time you adopt tech, the reason why the Housing Association hates it is because it requires more people to do more work. And it doesn't seem like it's helping, because at the end of the day, you still have to enter data, which the people have messed up before anyways. So it's going downhill and it's going to be crap. So if you're trying to solve any of this through software, and I think a lot of the discussion that we're talking about right now is linked exactly to the fact that that's all we know. All we know is forms, and all we know is somebody has to open up and the user interface should be great. There is no better user interface than a phone call and a text message. And that is raw data. It does not have any of the bias that your people are putting into it, which is massively problematic. So every time you ask somebody in your organization to categorize something, that is bias. Every time you give your resident an app, which actually has a drop down, you have just completely added bias to your data because you've not taken raw data. Yeah. So I think the bigger problem here is that we're having conversations that are 10 years old, because that's all we understand, because from a consumer perspective, we've now reached to a point that we think we understand that. I don't think there is any expertise in social housing to actually understand what's happening in the tech world.
I think that's
I could just see Matt wanting to jump on that,
it's such a great point. It's just, I mean, the proliferation of software packages in my organization is mad. You know, we've got a CRM that doesn't link to the call handling system, which doesn't link to the housing management system, which barely links to the asset management system. you know, and then I've discovered in the last couple of months that half our compliance stuff is being run off a spreadsheet that is 3 years old, because that was, so we may well be servicing properties that we've sold, or not servicing properties that we've built, because no one thought to add it into the system because it works fine on what they're using. And I think to Tripsy's point, it's sort of that thing that, yes, we're having conversations that are 10 years out of date, but some of the practices are 20 years out of date.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest role everyone needs to play is your job should be to replace yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And at this point, everybody's job is to retain their jobs. That's the issue. And I think we actually, from a macroeconomic perspective, have a problem, because look, if you look at where machine learning and AI is, and we deal with this every day, it's moving at a speed that I don't think people in the real general world actually recognize. And it's really, really fast. In just like the last 18 months, we've been able to do things which most people would say, that's magic. Do you have 20 people behind it? It's not. And honestly, it's not because we're the smartest people in the world. It's where the technology stands today. So it's just the baseline of tech discussions in general has to step up, because we shouldn't be talking about integrations. We don't need them. We're at a point where data is supposed to tell you what to do, but you can theoretically automate the what to do, which means all we are doing is actually standing back as kind of policemen and making sure that anything that goes off the rail gets picked up, because technology is not 100%, especially machine learning isn't. You will always have fallback. You will always have something that requires a human in the loop, and that human in the loop has to be very good at their job.
Yeah.
Now, for example, if you look at the jobs that were created in 1960s, right? The biggest company at that point was AT&T. AT&T used to employ 750,000 people. The largest company today is Apple. It employs 160,000 people. So if you actually look at, there is a bigger problem. The bigger problem is that because of the role that technology has started to play, a lot of the tasks that make up a job actually can get automated. As a result, generally worldwide, the trend is that there will be fewer people doing much higher value jobs, which means you'll have fewer people doing things like data entry. You'll have fewer people doing things like checking the data entry, things like that. But you have a lot of people who have to take decisions where the machine didn't get it right. And you have to feed it back into it so that he doesn't get it wrong the next time, which means the quality of people who are actually working with the machine has to be exemplary. You have to be people who understand operations inside out, people who actually understand when somebody understands the undertone of, I have a problem with my toilet and there seems to be a leak coming through. Somebody who understands that actually may be something that has happened in the past. So should we be looking at the machine models in a way that it's picked up the wrong thing? You're designing how the machine should be categorizing things. The other problem is we think as humans and we assume machines to think like humans. Machines don't have to work with a logic system anymore. They work with patterns. So you may say that I need this to pass into this to pass into this in order to make it a process. Actually, the machine may be able to take that leap without having to go through the same process that a human does. So you actually need completely different skill sets. You need somebody who understands how data is used, how data is processed, but not in the way of it went into a database, that database got connected by X fields, and then this is my user interface. That's software. We're not at a phase where you need people who understand software. If you do want to actually make that change, you need to bring in people who first understand data and operations at the same time, which means you actually need to completely change your ops team to think in a way which operations never has previously. And your ops team becomes really important, but your ops team skills, which we've picked up in the last 20 years, in a way are slightly becoming obsolete because they're not thinking the right way in order to replace themselves.
Thank you. And I really agree. I know with the whole bias of everything that we do in drop downs, every single survey is guiding people to answer in a way that you want them to, and it really prevents you from seeing things that you actually do really need to see, and it stops people from engaging with you as well, because they can't. I think I think I mentioned it in one of the comments in an earlier session. It's, in the end, what you want to know is, so you had a repair, and it was Leslie in the keynote speech this morning, and in the end it took 4 attempts to get her toilet fixed or something like that. The guy who came out and did the 4th repair, he was brilliant. He got the repair sorted in one go, took the right tools, etc. But it took 4 times, and you're only kind of, in many surveys, you're only judging the end product, and you don't have enough room to talk about your frustrations, how many times you've had to stay at home, how many times you had to call your boss that you were coming in late because the plumber was coming again to try and fix a simple fix on your toilet. And with things like the tools that you are describing, Tritsy, I think that's where the future needs to be, because that's where the strangely, through automation, the human experience of what it is to, in this case, like to experience property maintenance, can actually make you deliver better services, if that makes sense.
I think from a business perspective, though, it's also important because it helps you prioritize. I think I was listening into the Switchy conversation where people kept asking, how do I prioritize where I deploy IoT? Because I have 5,000 units and I can't put 5,000 all at the same time. And in fact, if you were listening to your tenants and if you were using technology like machine learning through any format, you would know where, because it very quickly gives you those outliers. It tells you, like, for example, with one of our clients, the security gates at one property hasn't been working for the longest time because they haven't been able to pass the visitors always have issues because every time they press 9, it doesn't go through. Now, the number of times that came up, it required us to then dig in, because immediately within a week, we knew that this is just an outlier. So why does this outlier keep popping up? You look at that outlier and you're like, they keep saying that when they press 9, it's not working. It's not that people don't know how to use it, because we'd already changed the responses to make sure they were getting detailed guidelines on how to do it. There was a genuine issue where basically the data wasn't matching. So when you dialed the number, it wasn't actually going to the right appropriate apartment. Now, this issue could have stayed completely unseen for 20, 30 days without somebody actually being able to react to it, because it requires somebody really irate in large volumes to come to you to kind of highlight that. It doesn't fit in any of your apps. This is not really something that fits within your apps. And the best way that they eventually did look at this was, great, so I know that if I do have a problem with this gate and my CapEx budget for next year requires me to prioritize something, I'm actually going to prioritize a smart gate for this property, because I already have that problem, instead of trying to solve it, because we actually not only have a data issue, there's also a wiring issue, which is why every time somebody presses 9, it doesn't go through. Your tenants and your actual conversations that are coming from the field doesn't need a survey, it just needs you to be listening. Now, we could hire 50 people who are good people to hear them, or we could use technology to hear them, but we can't bias it with drop downs.
No.
I think there's, could I probably say there as well, because I absolutely agree with that. And I think going back to something I said earlier, I think some of this is just about reframing what data is, both at an individual level and to an organization. Because, I frequently hear people say, we can't make a decision on that because we don't have available data, or we don't know. And you think, I can get data just by speaking to somebody. That's it. There's not a universal truth to any data. All data is created or collected by humans ultimately, or someone's got a hand in, someone's got some skin in the game. So bias creeps in at every level. The best data will get you starting asking questions, and that will move you forward on a pathway to solving a problem or to creating a kind of a solution. And I think having that kind of obsession sometimes about the purity of data within an organization can get in the way when we're kind of too obsessive. And that's where I think it was referred to earlier, where people start saying, data is the responsibility of IT, or something like that, as if they've somehow got some kind of special superpower in IT where they can kind of say what's pure data. So I think some of this is probably down to a kind of a legacy kind of mindset about what data used to mean. in the kind of almost the pre-digital days in a sense,
Yeah.
and people thinking of data as in inputting dates of birth onto spreadsheets rather than what data truly means. So I think that's maturing in the view of organisations at a quite strategic level, to be honest.
I was just thinking, shall we go to a few of the questions, or do we want to talk a bit more about this? And do you want to chip in here, Lara, or
I think there's a thought in my head.
ask questions? That's fine as well.
Okay, well, it's mine a question, and it's a question and stroke statement. Sort of what is data? Is your date of birth data, or is an analysis of 6,000 tenants' reactions to, I don't know, a maintenance survey? Is that data? I think they both are. And they both serve different functions and have different remits. And there is something that Paul said just now about saying, you know, if you want a view on that, you said data, I can get that. But then there are the people that will say, well, unless you've got 65, that's just an anecdote. That's just one person's point of view. It's not necessarily a data. However, I'm one of those that objects to that analysis because, like Tripti was saying, we're talking about residents who live in properties. We're not talking about cans of beans. We're not talking about cars or cats and dogs. You know, we're talking about human beings who live in properties. So one person has an issue, in my view, and this is, I've often fallen out with my employers when I work with housing associations about this, is if one tenant complains about one thing, that whatever that is should get as much attention as 10 tenants complaining about one thing, because there's a reason why that tenant's complaining. Now, like Tripti said, the person who pressed the door, the buzzer, and it didn't go through, they go, I tried to get through, I couldn't get through. I would be the one to say, but why? Why? What happened? There must be something wrong. Let's get underneath that. But in bigger organizations, is that if it's just one person, it sort of gets lost in the system. Now, is that because it's not data? It's still data, but it's like there seems to be a hierarchy of numbers when it comes to data. Whereas I think one person's feedback to me is data. It doesn't have to be about thousands and thousands for it to make an impact. Yeah, so that's where I'm going to end for now. Someone's mentioned my name. Any questions?
Laura, that's exactly how I feel. It's like people seem to forget that there's people in those houses. It's not cans of beans, and it shouldn't be, like Tripti said, someone being really irate to get a gate fixed. Like when I was talking to someone the other day, and they said a board member, they said how do they assign emergency levels to repairs? And the only answer I can give is how much that person shouts at the person that picks up the phone call. You know, it's not based on science or like the actual needs of the real emergency, but every single repair should be an emergency for the people, because every time something breaks in your house, it is an emergency. If my dishwasher breaks, it's an emergency, because otherwise I'm gonna have to clean all my kids' stuff by hand and I can't be bothered. And it's just that thought of like it taking irateness, or like that one complaint is just one complaint about X thing, it did damp, so it can't be a big problem. It's just one person complained, but it's only one person that's built up the courage to ring us. And assuming that every single person that is in your properties is as competent or as bolshy or as like eloquent as you are or are not is stupid.
I think this is kind of the right question moment to go to the top question on the list, which is asking: are we too super critical as a sector on the user management of data? I wonder if we moan about it too much instead of fixing it. And I could we were all very frustrated with the quality, and we all think that there's better ways of doing it. Why don't we? Are we too critical, and does someone just have to take the risk and, for example, tell Tripti, come in, do your thing, and let's get this going?
Well, I've seen a lack of leadership for sure, and there's a difference between working with private equity players and social housing. And there's a reason why for us to be able to develop what we have so far, and it's still work in progress, it only made sense to go the private equity route, where there were people who are extremely determined, where their bonuses are linked to the fact that they need to give the highest ROI, who then go ahead and acquire properties in volumes. And the smallest client would thus have 10,000 apartments, and the largest would be close to 100,000 apartments. In addition to that, the fact that we don't work in the UK and we only work in the US is because we don't want to have to hear the word GDPR again. Because even if nobody understands it, it's a cop-out. And frankly, even if, I mean, when when our entire team is based in the UK, we build everything in the UK. It's a British company that solves America's housing problems. And frankly, we prefer it that way because dealing with a UK housing association would be a nightmare. And the amount of time we have and the speed at which we need to move in order to work with the speed of what's happening with machine learning, we need somebody who can work at our pace. We can't slow down to work with the social housing. We can say, all right, in 5 years when we're kind of the norm and it's actually old, maybe you can adopt us, because by then everybody else would have already moved on.
That, and that's really interesting, and and I think going back to the question, there has to be a point of which we either stop saying the housing sector is bad at data, or we give it to somebody else to solve that problem ultimately, and we just say we're not up to it, so we need to hand it over. There has to be an end point in that, and I think you've just articulated it perfectly. That's what the issue is. There is a leadership kind of issue, but we need to grasp that really, really quickly. As I said earlier, we're going to miss out on tons of opportunity that other people are going to be taking advantage of and getting the benefit of.
Yeah, we're doing a capability study of our entire leadership team at the moment to try and understand how they actually understand data and how they understand why we need it and why we need, what it means, what decisions they think they can make or think they can't make with it, because it basically got to the point where I proposed doing a data a data quality project to try and actually just get our data, get a bare minimum, make sure that our customer data and our asset data just makes sense. I'm not even talking about anything fancy. All I'm saying is that the postcodes are actually postcodes, and that Mrs. Someone is actually Mrs. Someone. You've not got. Which we have multiple issues with this nonsense of errant full stop. And all anyone heard when I talked about that was, Matt's going to do a data cleanse. I'm not going to do a data cleanse, because all that's going to happen is you're going to just piss up the data again. And I'll give it 3 months and it will be shit again. So why bother? What we need to do is a wholesale change. It's a wholesale rethink about how we consider what we collect, why we collect it, and what we're going to do with it. Because it's all, people still insist that we definitely need to collect all of these people's national insurance numbers. Why? Why have we still got legacy things saying that someone's homosexual? And I've read the old forms, and it was because you might have additional needs. What nonsense is that? What did social housing think it was doing? Was it going to set the grind?
I think this is a really good segue, Matt, into Caroline's question that is now at the top of the list, who asks, does the sector think it is already doing good for society, therefore there is no need to change data-wise or otherwise? I had this argument with, I will let other people speak, I'm really sorry. But I had this exact argument with our community investment team, and they'd given us a bunch of figures about what they'd done last year. And I said, can you provide me evidence this has happened? And they went, I don't see why we need to. So, why bother? What am I even doing here?
I wonder though, she's saying that, Matt, whether the problem is actually data and whether it's more about adopting a very organization-centric view of the world, rather than just thinking about, it's fundamentally kind of human as much as anything else. And I've had people say to me kind of relatively recently, unfortunately, we need that indicator, because we need to know, for instance, if someone's Muslim, because that means we need to do this. And you're thinking, are you seriously putting a quarter of the Earth's population into one basket and saying that they all want the same thing because of this or whatever? Is that really the behavior we want to drive? And I think some of that comes from a kind of a paternalistic view of the world, and the paternalism drives the data you want rather than actually you adopting, you're acting on the kind of the data you're getting throughout your day-to-day interactions as much as anything else.
I think, Laura, you just asked a question in the chat, but let's just ask you, is data the same as evidence?
No.
You could just come in and ask it yourself.
I think that's the problem. Everybody looks at data as proof of doing something wrong. That, oh, let me pull something from this to prove that I was right and you were wrong. And I think that's a very good question, actually, Laura, even though you snuck it into a Q&A chat there while being on the panel. But I think so that answers the second question, which is, be honest now, is data interesting? It's fascinating. If you don't think data is interesting, it's because you've not been looking at it. Because it literally gives you, I mean, I can tell you what's happening in a property in Atlanta, sitting in my bedroom here in London, based off the data that's been flowing based off conversations. And it's really interesting because it gives you a view of what works for people, what doesn't. And if we genuinely do believe, as to that first question, that the sector is doing good, in that case, your data is really important because you can do better. And there is no threshold to doing good. I mean, if you think you're doing good just because you're giving people housing, then yes, maybe check, you've hit the first bottom rung of doing good, but that doesn't mean you're done. And that's where the data becomes really, really critical. And the data is not evidence to prove somebody wrong. It is to tell you what to do.
And are you doing good if the house that you give that person isn't good?
I mean, I don't think so.
No,
I think
mean,
a
like,
lot of
this is
people
where
have,
this IoT things come in, and like you go, well, you know, like if someone's going to bed tonight with water pissing down their wall because we've not sorted their house out, it's not fit for habitation, we've done a bad job. All the data in the world's not going to fix that. Well, hopefully it will, but like, but you know,
yeah.
I'm gonna oppose you there, Mark, because everything is relative. Everything is relative. When I was homeless and I got my first council flat, I didn't care if there was water dripping down the wall because I was homeless.
Yeah.
You know, it was that or sleep on the streets, which I did do. So it is relative. And I do agree with you. To be honest, I do agree with you. We are good and we can be better and we can be better than better. But again, those arguments are all relative.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I am speaking from a nice cottage in rural Somerset.
Can I just pick up kind of the point that sort of Tripta was making and everything? Because I agree, data is really interesting, Dave's question, but my God, we do a bloody good job of making it sound really boring. And in a lot of our organizations, you know, and I'm really, you know, I've been talking a lot about how we kind of improve data storytelling as much as anything else within our own organization, in terms that there is, you know, we've got some data geeks, you know, and who like looking at getting involved in the figures and everything else like that. But what are people more interested in? What you did there, Tripta, was tell a story about the outcome of the data. And I think a lot of the story about data at kind of a board or strategic level is actually quite boring, and it doesn't attach itself very much to the outcomes for customers, and it doesn't kind of tell the individual stories behind the data. And I think then data only becomes the story when it's bad, or there's a bad story. Like if you look what's playing out nationally or internationally at the moment or whatever, you know, COVID and everything else like that, that conference that was done where everyone presented those graphs was like an exercise in how not to present or even talk about data. And data became the story because actually people are spotting flaws in it. So I think there's a bit of a maturity in how we kind of talk about data within our organizations that does make it more exciting, that does show the possibilities of improvement and how we can make a difference for people. But it isn't often attached in that sense. It's often thought of in terms of a kind of a protocol or a systems or an IT point of view. And that's the bit where I think where we kind of lose people. And then, you know, we've all got a role in great quality data, absolutely all of us, but I'm not sure that's always properly understood.
Yeah, I think that Matt and I had a really short chat yesterday about exactly that. That is kind of a vicious cycle, that there's not enough resources being put into people who love and understand and can make sense of data and can get that to audiences within your organization as well as to your tenants. So all you get is your boring as hell pie charts and a few plots thingies in reports, and then that doesn't do any storytelling.
Yeah.
So then people go, well, anyone can do that, anyone can make a pie chart, anyone can do a pivot table, and data is boring. So there will never be any extra funding going to data departments, business analytics departments within housing associations that have the time and the money to really do that storytelling and show what's going on within the homes that they manage.
So
because everyone thinks that everyone can do what they do.
I think from a business case perspective, because this is eventually what it comes down to, right? Somebody has to pay for it. And the business case perspective, at least the way we've looked at it, and I don't know if this will work for social housing because I'm not an expert, but what it has worked is actually moving the budget from what we call the call center budget to the business intelligence budget. So what, for example, when we onboard Adam, firstly, the big one is you're using everything in the text format. So even when somebody calls a phone number, we're basically responding and saying, hi, is there anything I can assist you with, so that it moves, you change a channel to something that you can actually now automate. Now, there'll still be people who call from landlines, and the number of times, especially in a social housing context, we have this conversation. Yes, there will be a percentage, but it's still not the majority. And you can't stop change just because there is a group of people that you think won't be able to. You keep a call center of 5 people in order to take those calls. That is still important, but you no longer need 20. And I think looking at things incrementally is very important. So the call center budget is one that can honestly be thrashed completely right now with doing 2 things. One is you apply things like machine learning from whichever vendor, or build it in-house, do whatever you think works for you, but apply what's out there today. And from that, make sure you're automating that into cases, which is actually going into some kind of either a CRM or a database. Now, the problem with buying things off the shelf is that your data lake is actually biased by the way they structure their software. So if you are a large social housing provider, I still don't know why you're going and buying that software. Your base CRM system, which is just your case creation, it's a database which anybody can API into. You should own that. Like, and I know I'm saying this in a room where everybody tries to sell software, but it's too basic. It's too intrinsic to what you do. So build out that basic, database that actually creates your cases, and then that case can be worked on by individuals one by one. But now you don't need your call center reacting immediately to something, because you're able to. So I'll give you the metrics. When we start with a client, we usually will automate 60% of the conversations because we've already got the data now, and before that we'll do surveys to get from them what responses they would be giving their call centers to do. And that remaining 65% over the next 2 or 3 months of getting their data, retraining it back, can go as high as 70%. But what happens is very often there are processes that are missing. So you have to keep doing a human handover transfer because that operational process doesn't exist. But the beauty of it is now we know that process doesn't exist. So now we can design the next process and then inch your 65% up to 80 and up to 75. From a machine language or on a natural language perspective, actually Adam understands 96%. He just doesn't know what to do with 20% of it. So for that 20%, he says, please send us an email or I'll create a case, which basically says there's an entire budget that's sitting there which you can reallocate from that call center to your business intelligence side. And then from that business intelligence side, you then start pushing that into savings. Because in order to automate, it's not just understanding what it is, you still need a process that needs to come in, which currently is missing. So you do need to build out a business plan. But if you're looking for the chunk of money, I would hit the call center.
And maybe adding to this is Jane Elliott, who's from Switchy, who says social value calculators such as the one Hacked provide should help build the business case. Maybe is that something that could be added to the argument of using resources as efficiently as possible? Do we need a social value calculator in social housing?
Oh, fight.
Lara,
You
you're
would have
new.
always said no, Matt.
I wonder about its value. The way that I've been thinking about it is to say that building a business case should be about, like, at the moment, like, if there's all these nice things, and then there's also just like, let's make this save some money. Like, we, talking about the call center, that's the business case. Like, and you don't have to make those people redundant. You can redeploy them to something that's proper and useful, like tenancy management, not handling a bunch of calls. Because, like, I've been looking, we've got 40% of all of our calls to the repairs line are about repairs that have already been raised and just haven't been done. Yep. That's service failure driving an additional, they've got like 20 people manning a repairs line, and we're getting 200 plus calls a day. So number one, those people are not answering efficiently, they're not recording them efficiently, we're not doing the job. Like, and then how are we going to patch that up? Hire 2 more people. It's not going to fix anything. If you build another lane on the motorway, you just get more cars on it.
Anyone else want to add to that? I'm happy to go with another question from the audience, which has been there for a while, but it didn't really come up organically. It's from Mark, who says, poor data quality, a point I mentioned yesterday. Applications need to be a lot cleverer at ensuring rubbish data does not get into system, which means basically it's all about sloppy software design. And maybe that's also where, again, we get into then the whole category of drop downs and making fields as unambiguous as possible, to make sure that people do the right thing. And I know we advertised this session as well a bit about diversifying input, and we've not really talked about this so far in terms of self-service from tenants and using user portals, which I think could be a session for the future on its own. Maybe we can do that separately, because if you would combine that with kind of the more bias-free machine learning style solutions and tools to help you do that, you are far less confined to the drop down menus that people can choose from, as well as maybe excluding people who can't read or write properly, because unfortunately there's quite a lot of people who can't, and if you ask people to be responsible for the entry of their own data for 80% of their contact moments, and if you all push them towards a portal, then they might be better off with something or someone to talk to who can understand their needs. So anyone want to say something about that sloppy software design?
I do kind of agree with it, but I think some of it is in either our own fault. We've either procured that essentially, or we haven't kind of set the right kind of rules around it, or we're not working with the right partners. I do agree with that. I think the question, I know we're running out of time, but the point about diversity.
We're all running out of time.
Yeah. I think
not to this session.
Diversity of input, I think, is really interesting, because it's almost like, again, it comes back to we need to have a broad range of input or whatever that gives us the best outcome ultimately. And that kind of question, I've had that argument, Gabby, about kind of allowing people to input their own data. I should say customers and colleagues as well. And sometimes people will say, that needs to be verified, or we need to make sure that's correct and everything. I have to say, I trust a lot of our customers to input their own data more than I trust many of our own colleagues, to be quite honest.
I was exactly the same.
I think there's a lot of paternalism about people's ability to do some of that stuff themselves and everything. but I do take your point. There are exceptions to that, absolutely. But I think there is a whole thing there about, you know, we won't let a customer do this because they'll do it incorrectly, as if, you know, one of our executive teams could do it correctly.
Yeah, the quality of customer data on our internal systems that has been input by staff is demonstrates it's not just the you know, Amazon trusts me to put my own data in.
I just wanted to have I'm not going to attempt to answer the question, but I just wanted to add a consumer perspective to drop down menus. Now there's a couple of Apple accounts that I can't set up because the drop down options that Apple have, none of them, believe it or not, apply to me. I don't drive, so I don't have a car. I did not take a driving test. I never had a pet. All the you know, the bits, and it's so frustrating because whoever put those questions together had a worldview that was theirs and assumed that everybody had a pet. I never had a pet. I don't drive. I don't have a car. I don't remember the name of my first teacher. And I'm like, well, can I actually phoned up Apple and said, can I have another set of questions? And they said, no, it has to be one of these. And I thought, well, if I put something in there, I won't remember what the answer is because it's not true because I never had any of these things. And it's really frustrating. Okay, so that's just the consumer point of view.
That's a good point.
Our drop-down options are very reflective of our own personal experiences and therefore excluding a whole bunch of other people. So I feel excluded by Apple just because I never had a pet and I don't drive. And
you can borrow mine every now and then, which is quite annoying. So we can
and then the other option was my favourite film, and that changes every few years. So, but there you go. I just throw that out there.
It's a good point, Laura. You probably need an imaginary pet. You could start with that, but that would. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Again, it's setting things from an organisational point of view rather than the customer-centric point of view, isn't it?
I'm aware we're at like full time at the moment, but we started 3 minutes late because Stu didn't announce us in time. Oh no, Stu. So there's I think technically two questions left. The first one is from Caroline asking Lara. Caroline lives in Bradford as well. If she's got a place to live, two lovely people, so maybe, and they are lovely, I can vouch for them. So maybe you can have a chat afterwards to see if we can make that magic happen. And maybe to round off this session, give an example of rubbish data. Maybe you could all kind of give your favourite example of rubbish data in a bit of a nutshell, and then end the session on that negative
I'll
note.
go. I had a customer tell me that someone from my own organisation had knocked their door to ask whether Bromford owned this property. Essentially, they had to verify whether it was a Bromford property or not because there was no data on it, which I'm sure there is, but it's a frightening story.
I'll go next. When I was running the small housing association that I was running, we bought a property off a large housing association, and they never updated their spreadsheet. So we got lots of free repairs done, even though it was theirs. They still sent the guys around to do the repairs, and actually got a free set of windows replaced because they insisted the property was theirs, even though I knew it was clearly ours. And I said, who am I to complain? So yeah, so rubbish data can be beneficial if you're the small guy sometimes.
Tripty?
Oh, well, if it's examples of data not being used properly or not existing. I haven't paid an electric bill because EDF just can't figure out our meters. So I'm quite comfortable keeping these lights on. So that, I mean, that's a great example. But I don't think there is such a thing as rubbish data. In like all data tells you something. It's how it's the rubbish people looking at it. But I like data. So I would cuddle data and tell people to step away, please. But I don't think there's any such thing as rubbish data. It's how you're using it. And if you're not adding bias to it, it'll always tell you something good, bad, or neutral. Even if it is a bad entry, it tells you something. It tells you the quality of your people. It tells you the lack of training. It tells you there's a software that doesn't work for you. I think all data is good data.
Dave, since you're here, do you have a
Well,
favourite?
yeah, I will take Lara's and take that up a few levels and mention Paul's as well. I worked for a landlord many years ago where they were replacing the kitchens in the whole neighbourhood, and they approached one street, and the builders that were replacing the kitchens couldn't get into one property. So instead of going through the channels and finding out why they couldn't get in the arranged time, they tapped on the neighbour's door, and the neighbour said, "Yeah, I've got a key, you can go in there." So they ripped out their kitchen. Never once did they think, this kitchen looks quite nice. And so they ripped it out and replaced it with a substandard kitchen. Later on, they got back from their holidays, this family, to discover their nice new kitchen in their own bought property had been replaced by the housing association, and they didn't own that property. So they never asked to check whether it was actually the landlord's property. They never checked for security purposes. So my point is, it doesn't matter how good your data is. Idiots will always win. So there you go.
Yeah, that's a really good and positive note to end on. Idiots will always win. Maybe that's the title for the
Maybe it is.
Encore.
Can I just thank everyone,
Well,
Gabby, and yourself for hosting that, and everyone else for taking part. That was absolutely fantastic. I was captivated by that, as I know others in the chat were as well, and on things like Teams. We were talking about how positive and how fun. And we just ignored Matt's little sweary words, but never mind. It's okay, Matt.
I thought you said this was Uncon. I was like,
It is Uncon. You can swear away. You can swear away.
I can't.
you can say what you fucking want, Matt.
Right, and Lara, those colours are amazing because they are the DTL colours. I couldn't have paid you any more for that. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to wrap up now, folks. So again, thank you for your time. You can hang on the stage if you want and listen to me, or you can get off the stage if you want and listen to
Thanks
me.
very much.
Or you can choose not to listen at all. But thanks for that. Thank you, everyone. Right.
See you in a bit.
Okay, everyone. As you just heard, that was us about to wrap up, and everyone's coming off now. Lara's frantically working out how to stop. It's the cam on and cam off, Mike. Yeah, you can stay. As I say, I love those colours. A bit of brightness in our day. We need it because it's dark already. Everyone, thank you. Not only to everyone like Lara who's participated today, but also all the participants over the last 2 days. It has been fantastic. I think on a few notes I've made, the conference was about data and the human aspects of data and managing data as well. But what we found out over the last 2 days is that it really isn't just about the data, is it? It's about much more than that. It's about people, it's about humans, it's about systems, and it's about the real world. Data is only one little part of it, although it's a massive part in whole now. But it's not the solution. So again, some messages there. One thing I took a note of, which I thought was a fantastic quote, was everyone looks at data, I think it was from Tripti, as how things are going wrong. So you look at the data, but it's not always about that. There's people there as well. And again, as my example about the kitchen being ripped out, is data would never have solved that problem. Systems might never even have solved that problem. So you will always get, although it's comical, the landlord I worked for did have to spend a small fortune. So really they had to spend about 3 times the amount for that one place. Not the cost to rip it out, the cost to replace, the cost to re-replace, and so on. I wanted to just, for 1 second, pay tribute to somebody that's no longer with us in the sector. And it was quite apt that during that last panel debate, we talked about it, but it was also talked about during the 2 days, and that was storytelling. We lost one of the sector's most loved and valued people this year, John Popham, who struggled with illness in the last year or so. And sadly, John, we all loved and knew, was the ultimate storyteller. That's what he did. That was his life. He was dedicated to social housing. So if I had a glass, I'd raise a glass, everyone, to John Popham, a much loved person and sadly gone. But John would have loved this debate around data. I want to thank all the sponsors, because without the sponsors, we really, would find it hard to generate the interest as well on coming inside this platform and to help us pay for it. So thank you to the sponsors. Thanks to the delegates, and the amount of questions and debate in this UnCon, the third one, was greater than all the other ones put together. I think that's people getting used to the platform. It was the subject matter. It was very emotive and very powerful messages coming across. Some real interesting spaces as well on robotic stuff. Just on some of the stories we were told, again, storytelling from people was fantastic, and their technologies and how they're doing things. The panel debates especially were fantastic. But it was how you collaborated, how you talked, and how you hid up on the second floor but were found out. It's about the UnCon, and everyone, a big thank you. And thanks, Gabby, for that final swear word. So I'm going to say goodbye for now. We're going to hang about. Please network. Get yourself a drink, a coffee, a beer, a lager, a wine, whatever, and we'll have a little laugh for the next hour or so. Take care, everyone, and bye. Happy UnCon.